The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet suburban streets as Agent Chen sat in her unmarked silver sedan, occasionally jotting notes in her worn leather notebook. After spending nearly 12 years with the FBI, she had learned that patience was often her greatest tool. Today, that patience was being put to good use as she monitored activities related to a series of troubling civil rights violations in the area. She pulled out her phone to check a message from her team when something caught her attention in the rearview mirror. A police cruiser had turned onto the street. At first, she didn't think much of it. This was, after all, a normal patrol area. But after 3 turns and 15 minutes of the same cruiser following her, her trained instincts told her something wasn't right. Chen had dressed deliberately that morning in casual business wear, a navy blazer over a simple blouse and slacks. Her FBI credentials were tucked safely in her purse on the passenger seat, along with her badge and service weapon. As someone who had worked countless undercover operations, she knew the importance of blending in while staying prepared. The police cruiser's lights suddenly flashed to life behind her. Chen let out a small sigh, already running through proper protocols in her head. She pulled over smoothly, positioning her car well off the road in a safe spot under a large oak tree. Through her side mirror, she could see Officer Thompson exit his vehicle with his hand already resting on his holster, an unnecessarily aggressive stance for a routine traffic stop. As she waited, Chen clicked on her phone's recording feature, another habit from years of fieldwork. She also pressed the small emergency alert button on her watch, a standard FBI issue that would silently notify nearby agents of her position. It might have seemed overcautious, but something about the officer's body language raised red flags in her mind. The next few moments would prove her instincts right. Instead of the usual professional approach, Officer Thompson came up to her window with an immediate hostility that seemed to crackle in the air. "Hands where I can see them," he barked, without even a preliminary greeting. His tone was sharp enough to draw the attention of an elderly couple walking their dog across the street. "Of course, officer," Chen replied calmly, keeping her hands visible on the steering wheel. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" Her voice remained steady and professional, the product of years of training in high-pressure situations. She could feel the tension radiating from Thompson even before he responded. "You've been driving suspiciously through this neighborhood," he snapped, his flashlight beam sweeping across her interior, even though it was still broad daylight. "We've had reports of suspicious vehicles in the area." Chen knew this was false. She had already reviewed all recent police reports in the area as part of her investigation. This stop had no legitimate basis, and they both knew it. But before she could reach for her credentials to identify herself as a federal agent, she saw Thompson's hand tighten on his weapon, and her years of experience told her this situation was about to take a dangerous turn. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, investigating civil rights violations, only to find herself in the middle of what appeared to be one. As she prepared to carefully identify herself, she could see more squad cars turning onto the street. Apparently backup had already been called. For what, she wondered, a woman sitting quietly in her car. Little did Officer Thompson know that his next actions would not only change his life forever, but would spark a chain of events that would resonate through police departments across the country. The next few moments would test everything Chen had learned in her career, and their interaction would soon become a case study in law enforcement reform. Time seemed to slow down as Officer Thompson's face twisted with anger. The late afternoon sun cast harsh shadows across his features, making his expression even more intimidating. Agent Chen had dealt with hostile situations before, but something about this one felt different. More personal, more dangerous. "Step out of the vehicle," Thompson demanded, his voice rising. The elderly couple across the street had stopped walking their dog, watching the scene unfold with visible concern. Chen could see the woman pulling out her phone, likely starting to record. "Officer, I'm happy to comply," Chen replied, keeping her voice steady and professional. "But first, I need to tell you something important." She tried to reach slowly towards her purse where her FBI credentials lay. "Hands on the wheel," Thompson shouted, completely cutting her off. His reaction was so extreme that even his own partner, who had just arrived as backup, looked startled. "I said hands on the wheel." Chen's mind raced through her FBI training. De-escalation was key, but so was identifying herself as a federal agent. She kept her hands visible on the wheel, trying once more. "Officer, if you'll allow me to reach for my purse, I can show you my credentials. I'm a federal." "Out. Now." Thompson's face had turned red with rage. His partner stood back, looking increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. More patrol cars were arriving, their lights painting the peaceful suburban street in flashing reds and blues. Through her side mirror, Chen could see neighbors emerging from their homes, phones raised. At least, there would be plenty of witnesses. She knew she needed to stay calm, to be the professional in this situation, even as Thompson's behavior became more erratic. "Sir," she tried one final time, "I am trying to inform you that I'm a federal agent conducting an official investigation. If you'll just allow me to show you my credentials." But Thompson wasn't listening anymore. His body language had shifted from aggressive to dangerous. Chen could read it in the way he squared his shoulders, in how his hand had moved from resting on his holster to gripping it tightly. A small crowd had gathered now. Someone in the growing group of onlookers called out, "She's trying to tell you something. Just let her speak." But Thompson seemed to be in his own world, one where reason and procedure had no place. Chen noticed his partner finally stepping forward, perhaps sensing things had gone too far. "Thompson, maybe we should," the partner began, but it was too late. Thompson had already grabbed Chen's door handle, yanking it open with unnecessary force. The situation was spiraling, and Chen knew it. She could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. Her emergency signal had been activated minutes ago. Where was her backup? She calculated the distance to her credentials, wondering if she could reach them without triggering a worse response. Through the open door, the sounds of the gathering crowd grew louder. More voices were calling out now, telling Thompson to calm down, to listen. But their words seemed to only fuel his anger. His face had transformed into a mask of pure fury, all pretense of professional law enforcement forgotten. A police helicopter appeared overhead, its rotors drowning out some of the shouts from the crowd. Chen caught glimpses of more phone cameras recording, more neighbors gathering, more backup arriving. But none of it seemed to register with Thompson. He was locked in, tunnel-visioned, focused solely on her, with an intensity that sent chills down her spine. In that moment, as Thompson's hand reached for her arm, Chen realized this was exactly the kind of incident she had been investigating. The bitter irony wasn't lost on her. She had come to this neighborhood to investigate civil rights violations, only to find herself at the center of one. But unlike other victims, she had the training, the backup, and the authority to ensure this incident wouldn't be brushed under the rug. What happened next would shake the foundations of local law enforcement and spark a national conversation about police reform. But right now, in this moment, Chen had to focus on surviving the next few seconds as Thompson's control finally snapped completely. Everything happened in a blur. Officer Thompson grabbed Chen's arm with bruising force, yanking her from the car so violently that her shoe caught on the doorframe. She managed to keep her balance, years of FBI training kicking in automatically. The growing crowd gasped collectively, their phones recording every second of the unfolding chaos. "Stop resisting," Thompson yelled, though Chen was clearly not resisting at all. Her arms were at her sides, her body language completely non-threatening. "I said stop resisting." He shoved her against the car, the impact forcing the air from her lungs. The metal was still hot from the afternoon sun, burning through her blazer. "Officer, I am not resisting," Chen said firmly, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence that had fallen over the street. "I am a federal agent, and you are making a serious mistake." She could feel the edge of her FBI credentials digging into her hip where they sat in her blazer pocket, just inches from proving her identity. Thompson's partner finally stepped forward. "Hey, maybe we should." But Thompson cut him off with a sharp gesture. The partner's hesitation would later become a crucial part of the investigation, showing how even other officers recognized the situation was wrong. From somewhere in the crowd, a child's voice piped up. "Mom, why is he being so mean to her?" The innocent question seemed to hang in the air, making several onlookers shift uncomfortably. Some had moved closer, their phones steady, documenting every moment. Others stood with their hands over their mouths, watching in horror. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the tension, but these weren't police sirens. The distinctive sound of federal vehicles approaching made Chen almost smile with relief. Thompson was so focused on maintaining his show of force that he didn't notice the difference. "You people always think you're above the law," Thompson snarled, his words carrying clearly in the hushed street. The racial undertone in his voice was unmistakable, making several witnesses exchange knowing looks. His body camera captured every word, every action, creating an undeniable record of his behavior. Then everything changed in an instant. 3 black SUVs screeched around the corner, and fully armed FBI agents poured out, weapons drawn. "Federal agents," they shouted. "Step away from Agent Chen immediately." The look on Thompson's face shifted from anger to confusion to fear in rapid succession. His grip on Chen's arm loosened slightly, but he didn't let go completely. "This is my jurisdiction," he stammered, but his voice had lost its earlier authority. "Step away from Special Agent Chen now," the lead FBI agent repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. "And keep your hands where we can see them." The roles had suddenly reversed. Now it was Thompson who needed to comply with commands. Chen's direct supervisor, Assistant Director Wong, approached quickly. "Agent Chen, are you all right?" she asked, her eyes never leaving Thompson. The crowd had grown even larger, everyone sensing they were watching something historic unfold. "I'm fine," Chen replied professionally, straightening her blazer as Thompson finally released her. She pulled out her FBI credentials, holding them up for everyone to see. The badge caught the sunlight, gleaming gold against the black leather case. Thompson's face had drained of all color. His partner had already stepped back, hands raised, clearly wanting no part of what was about to happen. The local police chief had arrived as well, taking in the scene with a grim expression that suggested he knew exactly how serious this situation was. "Officer Thompson," Chen said, her voice clear and controlled despite everything that had just happened. "You are now the subject of a federal investigation for civil rights violations and assault on a federal agent." The crowd murmured, some even applauding. As Thompson was disarmed and taken into custody by his own department, Chen stood tall, watching the scene unfold. This incident would become more than just another case of police misconduct. It would become a turning point, a catalyst for real change. And as she looked around at all the witnesses, all the recordings, all the evidence, she knew that this time, justice would be served. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the suburb that had just witnessed history. This day would be remembered not just for the assault, but for what it would lead to: a complete overhaul of how law enforcement handled accountability and bias. But that was just the beginning of an even bigger story. Within hours, the police station turned into a whirlwind of activity. The incident had exploded across social media, with dozens of different camera angles showing the confrontation from nearly every possible view. News vans lined the street outside, their satellite dishes reaching into the darkening sky like metal trees. Inside the station's conference room, Agent Chen sat calmly, holding an ice pack to her bruised arm while giving her official statement. The room was packed with officials, the police chief, FBI leadership, and representatives from internal affairs. Everyone knew this wasn't just another case of misconduct. This was a watershed moment. "Play it again," the police chief requested, his face growing darker as they reviewed Thompson's body camera footage for the third time. The crystal-clear video showed every attempt Chen had made to identify herself, every calm word she'd spoken, and Thompson's increasingly aggressive responses. There was no room for interpretation, no gray area to hide behind. Outside the conference room windows, reporters gathered in the parking lot, their cameras flashing like lightning bugs in the early evening darkness. The story was spreading faster than anyone could control it. Video clips from witnesses were already trending online, with millions of views and thousands of comments demanding action. Your credentials were visible in your car, the internal affairs investigator noted, pointing to a frame in the security footage from a nearby house. He would have seen them if he just looked. The frustration in her voice was clear. This could have been avoided so easily. Chen's phone buzzed constantly with messages from fellow agents across the country. Many shared similar stories that had gone unreported, while others offered support and encouragement. This incident was becoming a rallying cry for change within law enforcement itself. Assistant Director Wong stood at the whiteboard, mapping out the immediate response plan. "We need to be transparent," she insisted. "No closed-door meetings, no private settlements. The public needs to see that we take this seriously." Several heads nodded in agreement. The old ways of handling police misconduct wouldn't work this time. The police chief's phone rang, and he stepped out to take the call. When he returned, his expression was grim. "The mayor wants a press conference tonight," he announced. "And the governor just called. This is going statewide." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. Meanwhile, in another part of the station, Thompson sat in an interview room, his arrogance replaced by nervous energy. His union representative had arrived, but even he looked troubled after watching the videos. The evidence was overwhelming, and Thompson's record wasn't helping. 3 previous complaints of excessive force, all involving minorities, all mysteriously dismissed. Back in the conference room, Chen rolled her shoulders, trying to ease the tension. A young officer brought her a cup of coffee, his hands shaking slightly. "I just wanted to say," he started hesitantly, "what happened to you. It's why I became a cop. To stop things like this." His sincerity brought the first real smile to Chen's face since the incident. The department's PR team rushed in with draft statements, but Wong waved them away. "No prepared statements," she declared. "We're going to tell the truth, straight and simple. The public deserves that much." Her words seemed to lift a weight from the room. Finally, someone was willing to break the blue wall of silence. As evening fell completely, more officers began arriving for the night shift. They walked past the conference room windows, some avoiding eye contact, others nodding respectfully to Chen. The incident had drawn a clear line: those who wanted change and those who resisted it. "Your emergency signal worked perfectly," the tech specialist reported, pulling up the response time data. From activation to FBI arrival was exactly 6 minutes, 12 seconds. A small victory, but an important one. The system had worked as designed, possibly saving lives. The story was far from over, but something fundamental had shifted. In that conference room, surrounded by evidence and witnesses, the old excuses crumbled. There would be no sweeping this under the rug, no quiet transfers or paid leave. Real change was coming, and it had started with one traffic stop on a quiet suburban street. The next morning, the Joint FBI Internal Affairs Task Force set up in a makeshift command center. Papers covered every surface, and computer screens displayed timelines, records, and evidence from the incident. But what they found as they dug deeper made the incident with Agent Chen look like the tip of a very large iceberg. "Look at this," called out one investigator, waving a file. 3 complaints against Thompson last year alone. All filed by minority women, all during traffic stops. She spread the papers across the table, revealing a pattern that was impossible to ignore. And every single one was dismissed without a proper investigation. The task force's lead investigator rubbed his tired eyes. They'd been working since dawn, and each new discovery painted an increasingly troubling picture. "Pull up his dashcam footage from the last 6 months," he ordered. The tech team nodded, fingers flying across keyboards. In another room, civilian witnesses from the neighborhood sat giving statements. The elderly couple with the dog had captured everything on their phones. "We walk that route every day," the wife explained, her voice shaking slightly. "We've seen him hassle people before, but never like this. Never so angry." A young college student who lived nearby shared her footage too. "I started recording because I've seen too many videos that start too late," she said firmly. "People always say, we don't know what happened before. But this time, we do. We saw everything from the beginning." Back in the command center, Chen reviewed Thompson's personnel file with growing concern. His previous supervisor filed multiple reports about his behavior, she noted. Recommended additional training, psychological evaluation, even desk duty. None of it was ever acted on. The investigation expanded beyond Thompson himself. How had his behavior gone unchecked for so long? Who had buried the previous complaints? The task force followed each lead, each paper trail, each deleted email. They found a system designed to protect its own, even at the cost of public safety. Got something. Called out one of the tech experts. Security footage from the grocery store 2 blocks away. Shows him following Agent Chen's car for 20 minutes before the stop. No traffic violations, no suspicious behavior. He was profiling, plain and simple. The police chief arrived around noon, looking like he hadn't slept. More videos had surfaced overnight. Dashcam footage from Thompson's previous stops showing similar aggressive behavior. Social media was full of people coming forward with their own stories about encounters with him. The department's internal messaging system, a data analyst announced, drawing everyone's attention. "Look at these exchanges between Thompson and other officers." The messages revealed jokes about profiling, warnings about internal investigations, advice on avoiding body camera rules. It wasn't just one officer, it was a culture. Chen stood at the evidence board, connecting threads between incidents. Each piece told part of a larger story. About power, about prejudice, about a system that had lost its way. But this time would be different. This time, they had everything documented, everything recorded, everything backed up. The task force's phones rang constantly. Other departments across the country wanted to know how they'd missed the signs. Civil rights organizations offered support and resources. Police reform advocates asked to use the case as a teaching tool. What had started as one traffic stop was becoming a national conversation about accountability. His previous partner just agreed to talk, announced Assistant Director Wong, hanging up her phone. Says he requested a transfer 6 months ago because of Thompson's behavior. Wrote a detailed report about why. She paused, letting the implications sink in. The report vanished, but he kept a copy. As the day wore on, the evidence mounted. Thompson's record revealed a clear pattern of escalating behavior, of warnings ignored, of chances given when consequences were needed. But it also revealed something else. A system that needed fundamental change. The task force worked late into the evening, piecing together years of incidents, complaints, and cover-ups. This wasn't just about one officer anymore. It was about bringing real change to a system that had protected the wrong people for far too long. And for the first time, it felt like that change might actually happen. The police department's response came swiftly and decisively. By the end of the week, the chief stood before a room packed with reporters, community leaders, and concerned citizens. The usual polished PR speak was gone, replaced by something raw and honest that caught everyone by surprise. "We failed," the chief began, his voice heavy with emotion. "Not just in this incident, but in our duty to protect and serve everyone equally." The room fell silent, reporters' pens frozen mid-stroke. No one had expected this level of candor. "Starting today, we're making fundamental changes to how this department operates." Behind the scenes, things were already shifting. The Internal Affairs Office had been completely restructured, with new leadership and direct oversight from civilian committees. Officers who had previously stayed quiet began coming forward, sharing their own concerns about colleagues' behavior. "Look at this," said a senior officer, pointing to a computer screen where she was reviewing body camera footage. "We've got dozens of officers requesting reviews of old incidents. They want to make sure nothing was missed, nothing was covered up." Her eyes were bright with cautious hope. They're choosing accountability over silence. The training academy underwent an immediate overhaul. Agent Chen had been invited to help design new programs focusing on de-escalation and bias recognition. The classroom was full as she shared her experience, not as an FBI agent, but as someone who had faced discrimination firsthand. "It's not enough to just not be biased," she explained to the attentive officers. "We have to actively work against it. Every traffic stop, every interaction, every decision we make affects someone's life." The officers took notes, asked questions, engaged in difficult but necessary conversations. Community meetings sprang up across the city. Instead of the usual defensive stance, police leadership listened as residents shared their experiences. One elderly man stood up, his voice shaking. "I've lived here 40 years, and this is the first time I feel like someone's really hearing us." The department's computer systems were also getting an upgrade. No more buried complaints or lost reports. Every interaction would be logged, tracked, and reviewed. Transparency isn't just a buzzword anymore, the tech team leader explained as she installed the new software. It's built into the system itself. Officer Thompson's former partner had become an unexpected ally in the reform efforts. "I regret not speaking up sooner," he admitted during a training session. "But now I understand. Staying quiet isn't being loyal. Real loyalty is holding each other accountable." The changes weren't always smooth. Some officers resisted, clinging to old ways and old excuses. But the department's message was clear: adapt or find another job. "We're not just changing policies," the chief explained in a department-wide meeting. "We're changing our entire culture." Community trust began to rebuild, slowly but surely. Officers reported feeling more supported in doing the right thing. Citizens noted a difference in their daily interactions with police. Small changes added up to significant improvements. The FBI task force's presence had initially created tension, but now they worked seamlessly with local officers. "It's like watching a wall come down," observed Assistant Director Wong. "They're seeing us as partners in making things better, not outsiders trying to cause trouble." Local businesses joined the effort, offering their spaces for community dialogues. A coffee shop owner hosted weekly meetings between officers and residents. "Sometimes all it takes is a cup of coffee and an honest conversation," she said, watching an animated discussion between a rookie officer and a community activist. As the sun set on another busy day of change and challenges, Chen stood in the parking lot of the police station. A group of new recruits passed by, each one stopping to thank her. Not for being an FBI agent, but for helping create a department they could be proud to join. The work was far from over, but something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't just about one incident anymore. It was about building a new kind of law enforcement, one that truly served and protected everyone equally. And for the first time, it felt like real change was possible. The courthouse buzzed with tension on the morning of Thompson's trial. People lined up hours before the doors opened, some holding signs demanding justice, others simply there to witness history. The media presence was massive, with cameras and reporters from across the country crowding the steps. Inside, the courtroom was packed to capacity. Agent Chen sat in the front row, her posture perfect, her expression calm. The evidence was overwhelming. Dozens of witness videos, body camera footage, Thompson's documented history of similar incidents, and testimony from his former colleagues. The defendant didn't just break the law, the prosecutor began, her voice clear and steady. He broke the public's trust. She gestured to the screen where Thompson's body camera footage played silently. This isn't about one traffic stop gone wrong. It's about years of unchecked behavior and a system that allowed it to continue. The defense tried to paint Thompson as a dedicated officer who made a mistake, but the evidence told a different story. His own text messages, revealed during discovery, showed a pattern of bias that couldn't be explained away. Former colleagues testified about incidents they'd witnessed, finally breaking the code of silence. During a break, Chen stood in the courthouse hallway, surrounded by other officers who had come to support the prosecution. This case isn't just about getting a conviction, she overheard one young officer say to another. It's about showing that no one is above the law, especially those of us sworn to uphold it. The elderly couple who had recorded the incident took the stand, their testimony powerful in its simplicity. We couldn't just walk away, the wife explained, her voice trembling slightly. Not this time. We had to stand up for what's right. Her husband nodded, squeezing her hand as she stepped down from the witness box. Thompson's former partner testified next, describing the gradual escalation of concerning behavior he observed. I told myself it wasn't my problem, he admitted, looking down at his hands. I convinced myself that loyalty meant keeping quiet. I was wrong, and I'm here to make it right. The tech expert who analyzed the dashcam footage presented a detailed timeline, showing how Thompson had targeted Chen's car long before any supposed traffic violation. The evidence was clinical, precise, and damning. Maps showed his patrol patterns, focusing on certain neighborhoods while avoiding others. During lunch break, Chen sat with Assistant Director Wong in a quiet corner of the courthouse cafe. Whatever happens, Wong said, stirring her coffee, you've already changed things. Departments across the country are reviewing their policies because of this case. The afternoon brought character witnesses, community members who had experienced similar treatment from Thompson, but hadn't filed formal complaints, believing nothing would change. Their stories painted a picture of an officer who had abused his power repeatedly, secure in the knowledge that the system would protect him. As closing arguments approached, the courthouse grew even more crowded. Officers in uniform stood alongside community activists, all watching as the final pieces of evidence were presented. The prosecutor's closing argument was powerful in its simplicity. This isn't just about punishing one person. It's about setting a standard for what we expect from those who wear the badge. The jury filed out to begin deliberations as the sun began to set. In the courthouse plaza, citizens and officers alike waited together, sharing stories and hopes for change. The barriers that had long divided them seemed just a little bit lower. No matter what happens, Chen told a group of young officers who had gathered around her, remember this moment. Remember how it feels to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. The message was clear. This case represented more than just one incident or one officer. It was about accountability, about change, about building a justice system that truly served everyone equally. As the courthouse lights glowed in the gathering dusk, everyone knew they were part of something bigger than themselves. The verdict came after 2 days of deliberation. As the jury filed back into the courtroom, you could hear a pin drop. The forewoman stood, holding a small piece of paper that would make history. On the charge of civil rights violations, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of assault on a federal agent, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted in quiet murmurs. Thompson sat motionless, staring straight ahead. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder, but he shrugged it off. In the gallery, several officers nodded grimly. This was justice, even if it was hard to watch one of their own face consequences. Outside, rain had started to fall, but the crowd waiting for news only grew larger. When the verdict was announced, there were no cheers, no celebrations, just a collective sigh of relief. This wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. The judge's sentencing speech became an instant classic in law enforcement training. The badge is not a shield from responsibility, she declared, her voice carrying to every corner of the hushed courtroom. It's a symbol of it. When we give someone power over others, we expect them to use it wisely and justly. Chen sat with the prosecution team as they packed up their files. This case will be taught in academies for years, the lead prosecutor said, carefully organizing evidence folders. Not just because we won, but because it shows how proper police work and accountability go hand in hand. The changes started almost immediately. Police departments across the country began reaching out, wanting to learn from the case. Chen found herself traveling to different cities, sharing her experience not as a victim, but as a catalyst for change. At one police academy, a young cadet raised her hand after Chen's presentation. "Weren't you afraid?" she asked. Not just during the incident, but afterward, standing up to the whole system. Chen's answer was honest. Sometimes doing the right thing means being scared and doing it anyway. The case sparked a nationwide review of similar incidents. Old complaints were reopened, procedures were updated, and most importantly, officers who had stayed quiet began to speak up. The blue wall of silence was crumbling, replaced by a new understanding of what real loyalty meant. Back at the local department, the changes were even more dramatic. The chief had installed a civilian review board with real power. Body cameras couldn't be turned off during interactions with the public. Training now included extensive work on bias recognition and cultural understanding. It's not just about rules and procedures, Chen explained to a room full of supervisors from different departments. It's about changing how we think about power and responsibility. She showed them the footage from her incident, using it to point out moments where different choices could have prevented everything. The elderly couple who had recorded the incident became local heroes in their own right. They started a community watch program, working with police to build trust between officers and residents. "We're not against the police," the husband would explain. "We're against abuse of power, and that's something everyone should stand against." Thompson's former partner became an instructor in the department's new training program. "I tell every class about my mistakes," he said during a training session. "About staying quiet when I should have spoken up. Sometimes the best lessons come from our biggest regrets." The media attention eventually died down, but the impact continued to grow. Other officers involved in similar incidents began facing real consequences. Departments started competing to show who could be more transparent, more accountable, more connected to their communities. 1 year after the verdict, Chen stood in front of a new class of recruits. "Your badge is not just a symbol of authority," she told them. "It's a promise to do what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." The recruits listened intently, understanding that they were part of a new era in law enforcement. 5 years after the incident, the small suburban street where it all began looked much the same. But the changes that started there had spread far beyond its quiet corners. Chen stood at the spot where she'd been pulled over, now marked by a small plaque dedicated to police reform and community unity. The police department had become a national model for change. Officers from across the country came to learn from their new training programs. The old guard who had resisted change had mostly retired or moved on, replaced by a new generation that understood the importance of earning the community's trust. "It's like night and day," said one veteran officer, watching recruits practice de-escalation techniques with community volunteers. "When I started, it was all about authority. Now it's about service, about really helping people." The training room walls displayed photos of successful community partnerships, including one of Chen speaking at the first graduation after the reforms. The elderly couple still walked their dog past that spot every evening, but now they often stopped to chat with the officers on patrol. They had become unofficial neighborhood historians, telling new residents about how one incident had sparked a revolution in policing. During a community coffee meeting, a young mother stood up to share her story. "Last week, my teenage son was pulled over," she began, and the room grew quiet, expecting another tale of bias. The officer was professional, respectful, and even explained why she made the stop. That's the change we've been waiting for. The department's new transparency system had become a model for others. Every complaint, every use of force, every traffic stop was tracked and reviewed. But more importantly, good police work was also recognized and rewarded. Officers who showed exceptional community service or de-escalation skills became mentors to others. Chen's FBI team had expanded their civil rights division, working closely with police departments nationwide to implement similar reforms. The goal isn't to catch bad officers, she explained during a training session. It's to create good ones and to give them the support and training they need to serve their communities properly. The courthouse where Thompson's trial took place now housed a center for police community relations. Regular meetings brought together officers, residents, and community leaders to discuss concerns and celebrate progress. The walls featured artwork created by local students, showing their vision of positive police-community relationships. Thompson himself had become a cautionary tale in police academies, but not in the way many expected. Instead of just focusing on his actions, instructors used the case to teach about the importance of speaking up, of maintaining professional standards, and of treating every member of the community with respect. The news media occasionally did follow-up stories, amazed at how one incident had created such lasting change. But the real story wasn't in the dramatic moments. It was in the daily interactions between officers and citizens, in the small choices that built trust one conversation at a time. At a recent police graduation ceremony, Chen sat in the audience, watching a new class of officers take their oath. Each one had been trained under the new standards. Each one understood the importance of their role in the community. As they raised their hands to swear their oath, she noticed something different in their eyes. Not just pride in the badge, but a deep understanding of what it truly meant to protect and serve. The best part, one senior officer told her after the ceremony, is that none of these new officers can imagine doing the job any other way. This is their normal now. Chen smiled, knowing that was the real victory, not just changing rules and procedures, but changing hearts and minds. The sun was setting as Chen walked back to her car, passing several patrol officers chatting with local residents. They weren't just enforcing laws, they were part of the community. And that, she realized, was what real police work should be about, not power over people, but service to them. As she drove away, Chen caught sight of a new billboard the department had put up, protecting rights, building trust, serving all. Simple words, but they represented years of hard work and commitment to change. The incident that had started it all was now just a chapter in a much larger story. A story of how one moment of injustice had led to lasting positive change.